Previously, we made a video on the Deoxys speed theorem, or how speed is almost everything, as being able to move first is just so incredible. That is still very much the case in most situations, of course, but today we're bringing to light that concept's rare yet highly important opposite. In such cases, speed is still almost everything. You just want your opponent to have more of it than you. These aren't just fringe scenarios either. These are highly significant elements of the game commonly seen at high level play, which creates situations where it is actually advantageous to move second, and if you want to move second, you're often going to want to make yourself as slow as possible. Thus, you could consider this video slow cinema. Not that there's anything wrong with going first, but sometimes you gotta slow things down. Let's unravel this mystery that upends the traditional notion of going first being better with measured Tarkosvian allure, as we delve into why it's sometimes better to be slower, or why speed isn't everything, otherwise known as the Slowbro theorem. We'll start off by mentioning those instances where going second isn't a choice, other than the choice to use the moves, of course, but made mandatory by the design of the moves themselves, those moves with negative priority. This is a tradition going back as far as the original generation, with counter potentially being one of the biggest moves in the game. The reward for going second can be potentially huge, as you bounce back any physical damage taken for double the amount, which usually amounted to a KO or very close to it. Well, in RBY, it was just normal and fighting moves, but seeing how popular body slams and hyper beams were, this was consistently excellent. Furthermore, in Gens 2 and 3, counter also worked on every type of hidden power, even the special one. Of course, Gen 2 also introduced a special counterpart to counter, which starting in Gen 4 would bounce back all hidden powers, which became a universally special attack in the form of Mirror Coat. The specifics of generational countercoat mechanics aside, the concept clearly illustrates the potential power of moving second. In this instance, weaponizing the opponent's own damage. Nowhere was this more prominent than on Wobbuffet, who utilized both these moves in conjunction with Shadow Tag and Great Bulk to force KOs on the opponent, making it far too dangerous to be allowed in OU in any generation, and quite a fierce weapon in the 4th generation of Ubers. Wobbuffet's countercoat shenanigans were by far the most reliable by virtue of how it prevented the opponent from escaping, leaving them hapless to avoid the effect. With Encore serving the punish attempts at using non-damaging moves, its bulk also meant if you tried to play around countercoat by using a physical move when it expected a special attack and vice versa, it could lock you into a move and then bounce it back accordingly. Other Pokemon didn't wield countercoat with nearly the consistency of Wobbuffet. They could be awkward to fit on movesets, especially since they were difficult to play around if you knew they were coming, making them exceedingly rare as standards. However, they could be incredibly effective as an occasional surprise on certain Pokemon, where they only needed to work once. Your Metagross thought it was safe to Meteor Mash that Blissey? Bam! Counter! Goodbye, Metagross. Heatran thought it had a free Magma Storm into Magnezone, but the Magnezone was Assault Vest and Mirror Coated it into Oblivion. Metal Burst also exists in the countercoat vein, but it's not used very much. It's a shame because Metal Burst bounces back both physical and special damage, but it only does it for 1.5 times damage, and it doesn't have the negative priority. Metal Burst's list of users is limited, and those users are flawed, hence its low use. But if you ever were to use it, you'd need to ensure your user was going second. Of course, this isn't difficult since Metal Bursters are generally very slow, but again, that's actually a good thing. Speaking of negative priority moves, that's our cue to launch into the Pokemon this theorem is named for. The Slow Twins fully embody the concept of out-slowing the opponent, and it's not just because of their names. Teleport in Gen 8 and Chilly Reception in Gen 9, which is also used by Galarian's Slowking, is a switch move with negative priority. What's the idea there, you might wonder? Choice Scarf U-turn Pokemon are very well known. The incredibly fast Dragapult is an amazing user of the move, so generally it's associated with a speedier playstyle. However, a slow switch move has a major advantage. If you go second, the Pokemon you then switch to doesn't take any damage. This is incredibly helpful for frailer Pokemon that may pose a major threat, but struggle to hit the field by virtue of their poor bulk. This completely circumvents the issue. Fast switch move users can still help them hit the field, but they have to force the switches to bring them in safely. If they use a switch move against a slower Pokemon staying in, the Pokemon they switch to has to take a hit after all. Thus, slow switch moves are excellent for guaranteeing safe entry. should the slow switch move user be effective at taking the hit, of course. And the slow twins are some of the best hit takers around, famously staying at incredibly high health with incredible ease through massive bulk and super reliable healing in both slack off and regenerator, with heavy duty boots protecting them from entry hazards. So what happens when, as is very common, two slow twins face off and both of them want to teleport or chilly reception? Let's just say teleport as shorthand. Well, the slower one would come out on top of that exchange, because the ones who go first would be forced to show their opponent what they switched to. This allowing the second teleporter to gain initiative through being able to select the switch in to counter what the opponent has switched in. Thus, in this situation, you want to go second. It's a speed tie you actually want to lose. So what do? You make yourself slower. As slow as possible. In fact, you run a speed lowering nature and drop your speed IV to 0. Of course, seeing as this is common practice, you wind up in that speed tie situation anyway, but hey, it's better than getting outslowed every time. This is the ultimate example of when going slower is better. When you want to be as slow as possible so you can hope to lose the speed tie when both you and your opponent use a negative priority move. Now, slow pivoting through switch moves was not pioneered through Gen 8 slow twin antics. Indeed, as far back as Gen 3, the concept was useful on bulky Pokemon who enjoyed converting their hit-taking ability into free switches for their teammates, with Baton Pass Celebi as the earliest common instance. Baton Pass Celebi was interesting because most of the time, such sets enjoyed speed investment, but since they weren't the fastest thing around, they could still often go the slow pivot route. And all-out bulky Baton Pass Celebi was sometimes dropped to speed 4 to beat other such Celebi, though not too far, as it wanted to be able to outspeed many Pokemon still, as opposed to the slow twins who weren't outspeeding much of anything at all. At the peak of Choice Band Sizzler's popularity in Gen 4 OU, top players would also drop their Sizzler speed a little to get the slower U-turn in the popular one-on-one matchup. In Gen 5, Fortress so excelled at leveraging its superb bulk into slow volt switches for its teammates that players wound up dropping its speed as well. But that wasn't the first instance of Fortress wanting to be made as slow as possible. In fact, one can make an argument for Fortress to be representative of this theorem, and we would be sympathetic to it. We just felt that the extremity of the ultra slow speed tie lost negative priority slow twins dynamic was more fitting. Anyway, the most obvious instance of wanting to make Fortress slow is its stab gyro ball, which increases in power the slower its user is relative to the opponent. When Fortress has used gyro ball to take on big threats like dragons, this is crucial. However, neither gyro ball nor volt switch always fit their way into Fortress hyper cram move pool. You know what does? Rapid Spin. While fast Rapid Spin is of course superb and allows a Pokemon to sacrifice itself for that all-important hazard removal more easily, see Starmie, Slow Spin is excellent in its own right, with certain unique advantages that faster spin can't match, which is why Fortress has been lowering its speed since before Gyro Ball was invented. There are many situations where one player really wants their hazards and the other really wants the hazards off. In such situations, it's excellent to have a slower spinner, because at the very least, you can guarantee that the next turn your opponent won't have hazards. An example to illustrate this concept: if you have Fortress out against a faster Stealth Rocker, you can Rapid Spin after it sets up rocks, and then switch to Volcarona before they set it up again. And Volcarona coming in on the turn the opponent sets rocks up is often deadly. It's one of the major drawbacks of Stealth Rock Ferrothorn, that teams with it can't check Volcarona with rocks as well, because Volcarona comes in before the rocks go up. Now, if Fortress was faster than the opponent and getting the spin off, the opponent could just set up rocks again afterwards, meaning the turn would end with rocks being up, meaning Fortress would be forced to spin again the next turn or have its teammates deal with the hazard. Every turn is crucial, and going second with Rapid Spin allows you that all-important one turn where you get to play without being bothered by hazards. Fortress being slower also works on the other side of things, when it's the one setting hazards, most famously in the thrilling matchup that is a Fortress Mirror, where they both spike and spin repeatedly. The Fortress that goes second and uses spikes can then switch to their spin blocker afterwards, maintaining the hazard. If they were going first and getting spun on, they wouldn't be able to do this. Thus, whether you're trying to maintain your own hazards or get rid of the opponent's, Fortress loves going as slow as possible, which of course results in speed ties, which make things quite complicated. But despite the uncertainty of knowing if you'll go first or second, the same concept applies. If you lose the speed tie and spike, you'll be able to switch to your spin blocker as planned, and if you win the speed tie and spike and get spun on, you keep going going until you lose the speed tie. The second rapid spin is also massively important in conjunction with other forms of passive damage flying around, such as sand or toxic or bird, whose presence often results in a one-on-one where one of the Pokemon, whether hazard setter or remover, will eventually faint, with the goal being to maintain or prevent the hazard by the time that happens, depending on which side you're on. This of course applies to the fog just as it does rapid spin. If you got, say, a burn Tentacruel and you're going to faint eventually, you want that second spin in the one-on-one against the hazard setter. Otherwise, the hazard setter will simply spam the hazard and the rocks will be maintained on the turn your burn Tentacruel faints. However, if Tentacruel goes second, it will get the spin off as it faints, allowing you to follow it up without hazards digging into you. On the aforementioned subject of Gyro Ball Fortress, an identical dynamic is at play for those other famous Gyro Ballers, Bronzong and Ferrothorn. They need to be as slow as possible to ensure maximum Gyro Ball power. Interestingly, this is why Ferrothorn's Gyro Ball doesn't actually threaten even the Steel-weak Clefable very much. Clefable just isn't fast enough to be truly threatened by it. In fact, some Clefable have even lowered their own speed to take less damage from Ferrothorn's Gyro Ball, but more on slower Clef later. It's also why the occasional uses of Cursed Ferrothorn have resulted in such powerful Gyro Balls. It's not just boosting its attack, but it's also increasing Gyro Ball power through lowering its speed. Funnily enough, it also makes Volcarona somewhat uncomfortable about setting up on Ferrothorn, as the Quiver Dance speed boost actually powers Gyro Ball up. In this vein, offensive Bronzong, to really maximize Gyro Ball power, runs Macho Brace to slow itself down to the max, ensuring it's smacking almost all but the slowest Pokemon with Gyro Ball's massive max power of 150 base power. Offensive Bronzong also wields a negative priority move of its own, Trick Room. Many actually are surprised to learn Trick Room is negative priority, as it's not widely mentioned, and they assume it goes second because the users are so slow, only to be caught off guard when a Trick Room user is actually outsped by Roar or Whirlwind. Yeah, Trick Room's negative priority is that low in the bracket. Indeed, Trick Room is perhaps the most iconic version of slower being better, though one could argue it's sort of an asterisk for the subject, as it's not really weaponizing being slower, but it's more so turning low speed into an opportunity to move first. Regardless, Trick Room Bronzong beautifully encapsulates this video's concept of weaponizing slowness, outspeeding everything under Trick Room and hitting as hard as possible with its slowness-fueled stab. These are the most prominent examples of slowness being a unique key to success, but there are many significant miscellaneous applications as well. Before we get to those though, we must quickly mention the uniqueness of GSC phasing. It's pretty simple once you get the gist, but boy is that just strange at first sight, as it is so utterly foreign to every other generation's concept of phasing. Gen 2 is the only generation where the slower phaser wins. The most common example, Steelix uses Curse as Skarmory switches in. Now in any other generation, Skarmory would effortlessly blow Steelix away, but in Gen 2, seeing as Steelix outslows Skarmory by a mile, Skarmory's faster Whirlwind will fail, and Steelix will roar it out. This mechanic applies even while asleep too. Sure, you can force that cursed Roar Tyranitar to rest, but if it selects rest while asleep, even if it doesn't use the move, it will still block a faster roar from going off. Cursing and phasing moves thus go hand in hand, as also demonstrated by Rhydon, and Skarmory itself is a superb abuser. Now GSC has the option of maxed out EVs across the board, so most of the time you're not going to want to mess with that. One of the few cases of not maxing your EVs out, the most prominent example by far in fact, comes in relation to lowering one's own speed. Roar Raikou users will deliberately not run max speed so as to underspeed opposing Roar Raikou and therefore always win the Roar War. And as long as you keep enough speed to outrun the next fast threat, like Gengar, you're not missing out on anything. No longer having a speed tie with Starmie is nearly never an issue. The underspeeding opposing Raikou thing worked well when the strategy was less known, but eventually speed lowered Roar Raikou became the standard, and once again, you would hope you lost the speed tie so that your Roar succeeded, while still burning the opponent's Roar PP at that. Additionally, in matchups against non-Roar Raikou, you didn't always mind being slower because of the following concept in the more miscellaneous area of slower advantages: being able to heal after being hit. Remember how we mentioned Clefable lowering its speed earlier? Well, when it has done so, it wasn't just to lower Gyro Ball damage. It's emblematic of a general idea where you are in a mirror match in which you are not in immediate danger, and your opponent is dealing less damage than you're healing healing up, and you want to be able to heal back up to full. This works across multiple generations, whether DPP, Black and White, or one of the fairy gens. It's helpful for Clefable to be able to shrug off opposing Moonblast and get itself back up to full before switching out for optimal functioning when it comes back in later. Chansey has a similar dynamic it lowers its speed for at times. If it's soft voiling to full health against an enemy Chansey, if it goes first, the opposing Chansey will still be able to ding it with a seismic toss to keep it at just under full health. Of course, healing first is great in many situations. You can heal in front of something that would otherwise KO you at a certain range and all. But if you can heal second, it brings major advantages. Plus, in the case of Skarmory against Breloom and Scizor, it actually wants to roost second. If it roosted first, it would lose its flying typing as they barrage it with superpower, making it weak to the move. In a similar vein, going second is actually ideal when you're spamming substitute against something that's going to faint, because that way you get to keep the sub up for the next Pokemon coming in. Let's say you've got a subbed up Toxic Protect Gliscor in Sandstorm against a Latios or Keldeo that's eventually going to succumb to sand. If you are faster, you'd be unable to prevent them from breaking your sub and preventing you from maintaining one as they fainted, leaving you vulnerable to the revenge kill. However, since you're slower, you get to sub them out repeatedly. This is as applicable to something like Gliscor as is to say Ice Body Wall Rain, especially when Pokemon have the bulk to withstand a hit before getting the sub up in the first place. You can really take this sub idea to the extreme with the highly specific but deadly pairing of a Slackberry. Far and away the best example of this strategy is Advanced Heracross. Its respectable bulk means it can take many hits, subs down to Slack range, and then pick off the opponent, especially since its Mega Horn is now Swarm boosted, leaving it with not just a sub, but also faster speed for the next Pokemon. Of course, this is Trick Room Bronzong-esque in how it uses its slowness to become fast, in a different way of course, but the slowness is key for this precise yet deceptively common scenario, which winds up landing Heracross a lot of what makes it such an immense threat. Finally, though this is quite rare in practice, Analytic does give an impressive boost to a Pokemon's attack if it hits second. Most of the time, Analytic is seen on Starmie, whose frailty means it prefers getting the Analytic boost on switches, not when hitting second. But there have been cases of Gen 8 OU Magnezone dropping Magnet Pull for Analytic and unleashing some truly beastly Specs attacks. And that's it! Obviously, this kind of thing is very Pokemon specific, but we wanted to demonstrate how there are certain aspects of being slower and moving second that are highly beneficial. Speed kills, yes, but sometimes it's the lack of speed that does so. Think of the legion of players bemoaning their inability to prevent Slowking from teleporting into big threats precisely because it's so slow. It also is delightful that there are multiple cases across generations where you actually pray to lose speed ties, from GSC Raikou to modern gen Chili Reception Galarian Slowking. Let us know if there are any strategies you personally like that revolve around going second, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Fall Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazon Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Jack G for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.